I remember sitting there, frozen in place, watching my own wife being led away by the most powerful man on the planet. I couldn't move a muscle. I couldn't force a word out of my mouth. All around me, about 50 other senators sat just as stiff, their wine cups rattling in their hands. A few were whispering prayers that she'd be sent back safely. Me? I was praying she wouldn't say something, anything, that could get the both of us executed. Those 20 minutes felt less like minutes and more like decades grinding past. And when he finally returned, he didn't just bring her back and leave. No, he sat down right there beside us. He poured himself a cup of wine, nice and slow. Then, with everyone I'd ever worked with sitting at that same table, he started giving a cold, clinical play-by-play of what had happened in that room. My colleagues just stared at their plates like they hoped they could disappear into them. My wife stared at nothing at all, just hollow, and I had to smile. I had to nod along like a grateful host. I even had to thank him, because the other option was watching my kids die. This wasn't some moment of insanity. This was a system, an engine designed with precision to grind down whatever was left of a person's soul. And the man who designed it learned every lesson by watching his own family butchered by the emperor who came before him. His name was Caligula, and the damage he inflicted on Rome was so twisted, so methodical, that even 2,000 years later we're still trying to wrap our heads around how one man could mastermind psychological warfare at that scale. If you think stories about the darkest figures in history ought to be remembered, feel free to like this video and subscribe. Your support helps drag more of these buried accounts back into the light. Now, let's go back to the man who treated cruelty like a craft. Stay with me here, because what comes next is worse. Much worse. And the scariest part isn't just what he did. It's that the system he built kept running even after he was gone. Before I walk you through the 5 acts of Caligula's terror machine, there's something you absolutely need to know. He didn't start out evil. He was shaped that way. And that shaping began when he was only 7 years old. Picture this with me. It's the year 14 AD. There's this little boy, 6, maybe 7, darting between tents in a Roman military camp. He's wearing a tiny legionnaire outfit, small armor plates, a metal helmet too big for him, and these bright little red boots. The soldiers, tough, scarred men who'd conquered half the known world, are laughing, scooping him up, tossing him into the air. They called him Caligula, Little Boots. He was the son of Germanicus, the greatest general Rome had seen since Julius Caesar. The soldiers practically worshipped his father, and they adored that kid just as much. To them, he was a mascot, a charm for victory. Wherever Germanicus marched, that little boy marched behind him. And the men honestly believed he brought them luck. So this kid grows up believing he's untouchable, loved, protected by the strongest army alive. Meanwhile, he has no clue what's waiting for him. 1 year later, his father suddenly dies. The official word was illness. The whispered rumor was poison, ordered by someone close to the emperor, maybe even the emperor himself. Caligula was only 8 when the gears of the machine started tearing apart his family. His mother was dragged out of their home, accused of plotting against the emperor. His oldest brother was locked away, starved so badly he tried to eat the stuffing from his mattress. His second brother was exiled to some lonely island, where guards tortured him until he smashed his own head against the wall just to escape it. One by one, his family disappeared, and young Caligula had to watch every piece of it fall apart. By 19, he was the last one standing, the final survivor of his entire bloodline. And then, out of nowhere, the summons arrived. Emperor Tiberius wanted to see him. Capri, this gorgeous island sitting off the Italian coast, had basically become Tiberius's private stronghold. He'd pulled himself far away from Rome, far from the Senate, far from anyone who might dare question whatever twisted thing he felt like doing. And if you listen to the ancient historians, Suetonius, Tacitus, the folks writing almost within earshot of the actual events, they describe Capri like it was some kind of nightmare mansion. By this point, Tiberius had grown paranoid and rotten to the core, surrounding himself with astrologers, flatterers, and anyone who'd tell him exactly what he wanted to hear. He was so bored and so broken that he kept inventing new ways to be cruel. And right into the middle of that mess walked a teenage Caligula. He knew perfectly well that Tiberius was the man responsible for wiping out his family. Everybody knew, but he couldn't let a flicker of that knowledge show. A single wrong expression, the slightest hint of sorrow, even a tiny spark of anger, and he'd be gone. So he didn't just make it through, he excelled. Suetonius wrote a line that has always chilled me. There was never a more perfect servant or a more terrible master. Caligula learned how to bury anything still human inside himself. He watched, studied, adapted. He turned himself into exactly the kind of creature Tiberius wanted to see. Obedient, amusing, harmless. He kept that mask on flawlessly for 6 long years. And then, in 37 AD, Tiberius died. Some folks say it was old age. Others whisper that Caligula held a pillow over his face and finished the job. Either way, that 19-year-old hostage suddenly became the single most powerful human being alive. Rome erupted in celebration, convinced they were welcoming the son of the beloved Germanicus. They had no idea they just handed an empire to a young man who had spent 6 years being trained, day and night, by the cruelest monster Rome had ever produced. And for about 7 months, everything looked perfect, peaceful, stable. Then Caligula fell sick, and the man who woke up afterward wasn't the same man who'd closed his eyes. What happened during those feverish days? No one alive can tell you, but when he finally recovered, something inside him had cracked clean through. Rome was about to meet the version of him he'd been hiding all along. And what I'm about to describe isn't just chaos or random violence. It's not the behavior of someone who lost his mind. Caligula built a system. 5 deliberate stages of psychological warfare, each crafted to crush a different part of the human spirit. The terrifying part wasn't the cruelty itself. It was how organized it was. So let me walk you through the blueprint. Act 1 of the machine, the sister goddess. Caligula had 3 sisters, but Drusilla stood apart. Ancient writers claim their relationship crossed lines that even Rome of all places, found disturbing. Whether those rumors were true or just political smears almost doesn't matter, because everyone believed them. And Caligula didn't bother denying a thing. If anything, he fanned the flames. Then Drusilla died. And what he did after that reveals the heart of his whole system. He took his private grief and forced an entire empire to feel it with him. He didn't just mourn her, he weaponized mourning. First, he ordered the Senate to declare Drusilla a literal goddess. Not a poetic honor, a real legal deity. Suddenly there were temples dedicated to his dead sister, and Romans were expected to worship her by law. Then he declared a formal period of mourning. And this is where things turn monstrous. Laughing became a capital crime. Taking a bath became a capital crime. Sitting down to dinner with your family? Also a capital crime. Let that sink in. For weeks, maybe months, if someone caught you smiling, you could be executed. Imagine living like that. Your little kid cracks a joke at breakfast. Do you laugh and risk death? Or do you snap at them for simply being a kid? Every shred of joy becomes dangerous. He was forcing Rome to drown in his grief, whether they wanted to or not. He discovered he could legislate emotions, ban happiness, reshape the inner lives of millions. And once he realized he had that kind of control, he started testing how much more he could take. Act 2 of the machine, the imperial brothel. This next chapter is so disturbing that even today, historians argue over whether it was real or just political propaganda. But here's what the ancient writers claim. Caligula set up a brothel inside the imperial palace itself. And it wasn't for his own pleasure, it was a public business. And the people working inside it? They were not common prostitutes. According to the ancient accounts, the brothel wasn't staffed by strangers or by women at the bottom of society. No, Caligula filled it with the sons and daughters of Rome's most prestigious families. We're talking the children of senators, provincial governors, commanders of entire legions. And he sent heralds into the streets to announce the prices. There were different rates depending on whether a woman was married or unmarried. And there were special fees for virgins from senatorial bloodlines. But the detail that makes this whole thing almost surgically cruel is this. He supposedly kept ledgers. Real records, pages listing names, dates, transactions, like some cold-blooded accountant tallying up human degradation. Imagine what that does to someone. As a Roman nobleman, everything you are rests on honor. Your family line stretches back centuries. Your name carries weight. And now your daughter, your own child, is being advertised publicly like she's livestock. And somewhere there's a ledger with her name written inside it. And you can't stop it. You can't protest. You can't even whisper about it. Because the punishment for resisting isn't a fine, it's execution. He isn't just taking their bodies. He's taking the one thing Roman aristocrats prized more than life itself: their reputation, their legacy, their name. And still, he isn't finished. Because he figures something out. Public humiliation is powerful, yes. But there's something even more devastating: private humiliation with an audience. Act 3 of The Machine, the banquet of predation. Picture the scene again now that you know the world we're dealing with. You're at an imperial banquet. You're seated beside your wife. Around you sit 50, maybe 100 other senators with their wives. Everyone's drinking wine that tastes more like terror than grapes. Caligula rises to his feet. Silence drops over the room. Then he begins to stroll among the tables, studying the women. His eyes aren't romantic or even lustful. They're clinical, evaluating, choosing. He stops at your table. He looks your wife over, inspecting her the way a man might assess a horse he's thinking of buying. Checking her hair, her teeth, the lines of her body. He doesn't ask permission. He doesn't even acknowledge that you exist. He simply takes her hand and leads her away. You remain seated. The senator next to you stares into his wine like he's hoping to drown in it. Everyone else acts like they don't see a thing. Because they all know. If you stand, if you speak, if you let even a flicker of emotion betray you, you won't leave that room alive. And neither will your wife. And neither will your children. So you sit there. You sip your wine. You wait. 20 minutes pass. 30. Conversations around you sound brittle, fake. Like everyone's words are cracking under the weight of what they're pretending to ignore. Someone tries a joke. It dies before it even reaches the table. Finally, he returns. Your wife sits down, eyes fixed on nothing. And then he sits too. He doesn't leave. He stays right beside you. And then, right there in front of your friends, your rivals, your entire professional world, he begins describing what happened in that room, every detail. Cold, graphic, clinical detail. He evaluates her, compares her to the wives of other senators, cracks jokes at your expense. And you have to smile. You have to force a laugh. You have to nod along like all of this is perfectly normal. Because he's not just violating your wife. He's dismantling you, your manhood as Rome defines it. Your ability to protect your family, your authority, your dignity. He's taking every one of those pieces, right in front of the people whose opinions determine your fate. And then, tomorrow you'll have to come back. Sit beside these same men. And pretend everything is fine. And the worst part? You've got to walk back into that room the next day and pretend none of it ever happened. Even though everyone around you knows exactly what went on. That's the genius, if you can call it that, behind Caligula's machine. He isn't just breaking individuals. He's tearing apart the entire social fabric. He's making every person a witness to someone else's humiliation, forcing everyone to carry the guilt together. And somehow we're only at Act 3. What comes next is so twisted that modern psychologists still study it as an example of engineered psychological torture. Because Caligula figures out there's one bond even stronger than marriage, the bond between a parent and a child. Act 4 of The Machine, the grieving father. I'm going to be honest. This part is almost unbearable. If you need a breather, take one. Caligula starts executing people. Not for treason, not for crimes, but simply because he's irritated, bored, or in the mood to see how someone reacts. And he comes up with a new rule. If he's putting a man's son to death, the father must watch. Not from a balcony or behind a crowd, but close. Right there in the front row. But what lifts this from cruelty into full-on psychological torture is a specific story recorded by Suetonius. A father stands there and watches his son executed. He doesn't even get a moment to fall apart. Caligula immediately orders the man to join him for dinner at the imperial palace. That same night, while the boy's body is still warm, the father is seated at Caligula's table. And Caligula just watches him, like a scientist studying a specimen. He waits for even the smallest crack, tears, a tremble, the slightest drop in composure, any sign of grief. Because if the father shows anything at all, Caligula will know he hasn't broken him completely, that there's still a sliver of humanity left to crush. So the father sits there, pushing food around his plate, pretending to taste it, pretending to hear whatever meaningless conversation is happening, while his son lies dead in some alley. And the man responsible for it is analyzing his face for entertainment. He isn't just taking your child from you, he's taking your right to mourn. He's turning the most sacred bond a person has, the love between parent and child, into a weapon. Suddenly love itself becomes dangerous. The more you care, the more he can hurt you. But here's the part nobody predicted. The machine had a fatal flaw. Because while Caligula was busy torturing senators and noblemen, people raised to swallow humiliation, people who understood politics and could tell themselves survival justified anything, he made one catastrophic mistake. He aimed his everyday cruelty at the wrong kind of man. The soldier. The final act of the machine, the wrong man. His name was Cassius Chaerea. He was a senior officer in the Praetorian Guard, the elite soldiers who served as the emperor's personal bodyguards. These were the toughest of the tough, men who stood within arm's reach of Caligula every day, armed and highly trained. Chaerea had one physical trait Caligula couldn't resist mocking. He spoke with a high-pitched voice, and Caligula, being who he was, wouldn't let it drop. Every day brought new jokes, new humiliation. And the detail that shows just how casual Caligula's cruelty had become is this. Whenever it was Chaerea's turn to request the daily password, a standard military ritual done in front of the entire guard, Caligula would give him passwords like Venus or Priapus, names meant to embarrass him, feminine references, sexual references, words guaranteed to make the other soldiers snicker, day after day, week after week. For Caligula, these were meaningless jokes, the kind you forget 10 minutes later. For Chaerea, each one was a sting, a drop of poison. Because here's where Caligula miscalculated. Senators can be humiliated because they're invested in survival. They've got estates, kids, legacies, and political futures they're desperate to protect. They'll swallow their pride if it means keeping their necks. But Chaerea wasn't a senator. He was a soldier. Chaerea wasn't some fragile senator trained to bow and scrape. He was a soldier, a man conditioned for violence, a man who stood within arm's reach of the emperor every day with a sword strapped to his hip. And Caligula, without even realizing it, had just taught him a simple truth. Life under this emperor wasn't worth living. Caligula had grown so certain of his machine, so convinced fear would always keep him safe, that he forgot one of the oldest rules every predator learns. Never corner something that can kill you. What happened next took less than a minute, but it changed the direction of Roman history. And the aftermath? Somehow even darker than the horrors Caligula committed while he was alive. January 24th, 41 A.D. Caligula is at the theater. He's in a cheerful mood. He's been hosting games and performances, and there's another play scheduled in just a few hours. Around midday, he decides to leave through a narrow underground passage. A dim, cramped corridor that links the theater to the palace. The place is claustrophobic. Rough stone walls, shadows everywhere, and waiting in that darkness are the conspirators. Chaerea steps forward as Caligula approaches. Nothing unusual yet. Guards check in with the emperor all the time. Chaerea asks for the password just like always. And Caligula, completely unworried, wrapped in that bubble of invincibility he thinks he built, gives one more mocking, insulting response. It's the last thing he ever says. Chaerea shouts, "Take this," and drives his sword up under Caligula's ribs. Caligula staggers back, tries to run, but the corridor is too tight. There's nowhere to go. Conspirators block both ends. They close in. According to the ancient sources, he's stabbed 30 times. 30 blows, 30 strikes driven by years of humiliation, rage, and fear. They keep going until there is no possible chance he's still alive. 4 years of pent-up terror released in 60 seconds of pure violence. Caligula is dead. And that's when everything spirals even further downward. The conspirators don't stop with him. They hunt down his wife, Caesonia. She knows exactly what's happening. She can hear the shouting, the chaos. She begs for her life, pleads for mercy, tries to reason with men whose blood is already boiling from killing an emperor. They stab her to death. Then they head to the nursery. Caligula's little girl, Julia Drusilla, is just a toddler, 2, maybe 3 years old depending on the source. A soldier lifts her up, and while she's crying out for her mother, he smashes her head against a marble wall. They need to make sure there's no heir left. No one who might grow up and seek revenge. So they kill a child. That's what happens when the machine collapses. It doesn't simply power down. It eats everything attached to it. For a moment, maybe a few hours, maybe an entire afternoon, it feels like Rome might actually change. The Senate gathers. They start arguing, debating. Some want to bring back the Republic. Abolish emperors altogether. Return to the old ways, the old freedoms. For the first time in generations, there's a real conversation about what Rome could become. And while the Senate is busy dreaming, the Praetorian Guard is busy looting. They're tearing through the palace, grabbing jewelry, cash, any valuables they can find. During the chaos, one guard hears something behind a curtain. He pulls it back and finds a man cowering there. Middle-aged, shaking, stuttering. Claudius, Caligula's uncle. The family embarrassment. The man everyone dismissed as harmless, possibly brain-damaged from childhood illness. The guy nobody ever took seriously. The guard looks at Claudius, not as some harmless oddball or stuttering family outcast, but as something far more useful, a brand new emperor. They hoist him onto their shoulders and carry him back to their camp like a trophy. And just like that, they declare him emperor. While the Senate is still locked in debate, arguing over the future of the Republic, the army has already made the choice for them. The machine, the system, survived. Here's the part that sticks with me, the part that keeps echoing in my head anytime I think about this story. Caligula reigned for less than 4 years. For years. In the sweep of Roman history, that's nothing. A flicker, a footnote. And yet 2,000 years later, we're still telling his story. Why? Because Caligula proved something truly terrifying about power. He showed that the entire structure of a state, its laws, its soldiers, its money, its bureaucracy, can be twisted into tools of personal psychological warfare. He didn't have to work around the system. He was the system, and he weaponized every piece of it. Those record books in the imperial brothel? That was the bureaucracy doing exactly what bureaucracy does, keeping records. The forced mourning for Drusilla? That was the legal system enforcing the law. The banquets where he humiliated senators and violated their wives? That was imperial hospitality functioning as intended. Every atrocity he committed was legal, because the law began and ended with him. And when he died, the machinery didn't die with him. It simply moved on to its next operator. That's the real nightmare. The horror isn't that one man was monstrous. It's that the machine he built kept going long after he was gone. Look at what followed. Nero allegedly setting Rome on fire and blaming it on Christians. Domitian having people executed for glancing at him the wrong way. Commodus forcing the Senate to cheer for him while he played gladiator. Elagabalus doing things so depraved I can't even describe them here. The blueprint stayed in place. The system adapted. Because Caligula exposed a truth Rome could never forget. When one person holds everything, military power, legal authority, economic control, cultural influence, there's nothing to stop them. No checks, no balances, nothing but waiting for them to die, or for someone bold enough to kill them. And even then, the machine just grabs the next man it can use. Suetonius wrote that Caligula was the best of servants and the worst of masters. And he was right. Caligula learned tyranny by playing the perfect subordinate. He studied under Tiberius, watched how a monster thinks, picked up every trick, every psychological weapon. Then he refined them. That's the warning buried in all of this, the real lesson. The most dangerous people don't start out announcing themselves as threats. They learn. They adapt. They wear the mask of loyalty as long as they need to, right up until the moment they can take it off. There's one last thing worth knowing. After Claudius took power, he ordered most of Caligula's records destroyed. The ledgers, the letters, the official documents. Gone. Burned. The historians we rely on, Suetonius, Tacitus, were writing decades later, working from rumors, memories, and whatever scraps escaped the fire. Which means everything I've just told you, the 5 acts, the mechanics of the terror machine, that's only what survived. Only what couldn't be erased. Imagine what we lost. Imagine what was so horrific, so beyond the pale, that even an empire that crucified thousands and tossed people to lions decided it shouldn't survive in writing. Caligula ruled for 3 years, 9 months, and 8 days. In that time, he built a machine that taught every future tyrant exactly how to break human beings. Methodically, psychologically, completely. And that blueprint never really vanished. It's still out there. Which brings us to one last question. Could it happen again?